The migrant women huddled in the dimly lit shelter, its walls adorned with faded posters. Among them, Elena clutched a tattered photograph as Melania Trump uttered three words never before spoken publicly. I was illegal. Gasps filled the room, eyes widening in disbelief. Was the former First Lady truly revealing a long-hidden past? In a speech that would reshape her public image, Melania laid bare her struggles and fears as a young immigrant. Her final message, delivered with tears in her eyes, would resonate deeply with these women's experiences. What truth would she share that could bridge the gap between their worlds? The air in the modest shelter hung heavy with apprehension as word of Melania Trump's impending arrival spread. Migrant women huddled in small groups, whispering nervously. The stark white walls seemed to close in, amplifying the tension. Worn furniture bore witness to countless stories of struggle and hope. As the former First Lady's motorcade pulled up, a palpable shift rippled through the room. Conversations gave way to uneasy silence. Many of these women had fled violence and persecution, enduring harrowing journeys. Melania stepped inside, her polished appearance contrasting sharply with the residents' simple attire. She paused, her composure faltering slightly. A security guard approached, offering a reassuring nod. "Everything's set, Mrs. Trump," he murmured. Melania thanked him quietly. Dozens of eyes scrutinized her every move as she made her way to the makeshift podium. Her heels clicked against the linoleum floor, echoing in the tense silence. Reaching the podium, Melania gripped its edges. She looked out at the sea of faces etched with hardship, resilience, and cautious hope. The weight of their expectations and skepticism pressed down upon her. Her heart raced as she prepared to share something deeply personal. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. Her usually controlled voice wavered as she uttered three words: I was illegal. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Women who had been avoiding eye contact now stared directly at Melania, expressions a mix of shock and curiosity. The former First Lady had shattered expectations with a personal revelation. In that moment, Melania's polished exterior began to fade, revealing glimpses of someone who had once walked a similar path. The statuesque figure transformed into someone more relatable, more human. As she continued, the initial shock gave way to connection. Women leaned forward, hanging on every word. Those who had been distant now gazed at Melania with newfound interest, perhaps seeing reflections of their own struggles in her story. The shelter, once filled with tension and skepticism, now hummed with a different energy. A barrier had been broken, allowing for the possibility of genuine understanding and empathy to flow between Melania and these women who had endured so much. Melania Trump's admission cracked open a door, inviting the migrant women to peer into a past they never imagined she possessed. As the shock subsided, a tentative quiet settled over the room. The former First Lady's polished exterior softened, giving way to something more vulnerable. Melania's voice quavered as she began sharing her immigrant journey. I arrived in New York as a young model, she said, eyes distant. Just 26, with little more than a suitcase and big dreams. The women leaned forward, expressions mixing skepticism and interest. She described 1996 New York City, painting a picture of a young woman overwhelmed by the cacophony of languages, towering skyscrapers, and relentless pace. Everything was new, Melania confessed, her accent thickening. The language, customs, even the food. I felt so small. Melania spoke of long days of casting calls and photo shoots, lonely nights in a tiny apartment. She described predatory agents, confusing contracts, and constant pressure to be thinner and more agreeable. There were times, she admitted, when I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. As she recounted her struggles with the language barrier, heads began to nod. Melania described the frustration of having complex thoughts but lacking words to express them. I felt like a different person in English, she said. Less intelligent, less funny, less me. The atmosphere shifted. Women who had been sitting with arms crossed now leaned forward, engaged. Melania approached a turning point, her voice catching. The hardest part was the isolation, being separated from my family, not knowing when I would see them again. She paused, collecting herself. There were days when the homesickness was so intense I could barely breathe. A collective inhale filled the room. This pain of separation was intimately familiar to every woman present. Melania continued, describing tearful calls home, guilt over missing family events, fear of becoming a stranger to her parents. I remember standing in a phone booth, she said, trying to explain to my mother why I couldn't come home for Christmas. The connection was terrible and I could barely hear her voice. A tear trailed down her cheek. In that moment, I had never felt so alone. The silence was profound. Gone was the initial skepticism, replaced by shared understanding. These women who had endured their own harrowing journeys saw in Melania a reflection of their own experiences. The soft murmur of empathy that had filled the room gradually faded, leaving behind a charged silence. The women in the shelter looked at Melania with new eyes, their initial skepticism replaced by a cautious openness. For a moment, the former First Lady seemed to struggle with what to say next, her carefully constructed persona wavering under the weight of shared vulnerability. Melania took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders as if bracing herself for what was to come. The hardest part, she said, her voice gaining strength, was feeling invisible. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Many of the women nodded, their eyes reflecting a pain all too familiar. She described walking down bustling New York streets, surrounded by millions yet utterly unseen. People would look right through me, Melania confessed, her accent thickening with emotion, as if I didn't exist. Or worse, they'd see only what they wanted to see. Just another pretty face, just another foreigner. Melania's voice softened as she shared a personal anecdote. Once at a charity gala, I tried to explain a traditional Slovenian dish. They laughed, thinking I was joking about eating horse meat. I felt so misunderstood, so out of place. The women leaned in, recognizing the sting of cultural misunderstandings in their own lives. Navigating a new culture, Melania continued, is like learning a complex language. Every interaction is a potential misstep, every conversation a chance to feel lost in translation. The analogy resonated with the audience, many of whom were still grappling with the intricacies of American life. She spoke of the subtle slights and not-so-subtle insults, the raised eyebrows when she stumbled over English words, the patronizing tones when she asked for help, the assumptions made about her intelligence, her motivations, her worth. Melania's story took an unexpected turn as she recounted her early modeling days. The industry can be brutal, she admitted, her eyes scanning the room. There were times when I felt like nothing more than a clothes hanger, a body to be judged and discarded. She described castings where designers spoke about her as if she wasn't there, agents who treated her like a commodity to be traded. But the worst part, Melania continued, her voice growing stronger, was feeling like I had to erase myself to fit in. My accent, my background, my opinions, I thought I had to hide it all to succeed. The women in the shelter nodded vigorously, many wiping away tears. This erasure of self was a pain they knew all too well. As Melania spoke, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The initial wall of skepticism had crumbled completely, replaced by a growing sense of solidarity. These women, who had felt so alone in their struggles, now saw their experiences reflected in the most unexpected of places, the life of a former First Lady. Melania's voice took on a new intensity as she approached the heart of her message. "Ladies," she said, looking each woman in the eye, "I stand before you as someone who has walked in your shoes, who has felt invisible, underestimated, alone." The room held its collective breath, sensing the weight of what was to come. "But I'm here to tell you," Melania continued, her voice steady and strong, "that your struggles do not define you, they refine you." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Each obstacle you overcome, each stereotype you shatter, each dream you refuse to let die, these are the things that truly shape who you are." The women in the shelter sat straighter, their faces a mix of tears and determination. Melania's words had struck a chord deep within them, awakening a spark of hope many had thought long extinguished. The atmosphere in the shelter shifted dramatically as Melania Trump stood before the group of migrant women. Her designer suit, once a symbol of distance, now seemed to bridge the gap between her past and their present. The former First Lady's voice, tinged with her own immigrant accent, carried a newfound strength as she continued her story. "Dies," Melania began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Our struggles do not define us. They refine us." The women leaned forward, hanging on her every word. "I stand before you today not as a victim of circumstance, but as the architect of my own destiny. And so are you." Melania's voice softened as she recounted a pivotal moment in her journey. "There was a time when I saw my accent as a weakness," she admitted, "but I learned to embrace it as a strength." She described a high-profile casting where her unique perspective caught the designer's attention. He said, "Your voice is exactly what we need." In that moment, I understood that my journey had given me something invaluable, a perspective unlike any other. As Melania spoke, the women's postures began to change. Shoulders straightened, chins lifted, and eyes brightened with newfound possibility. Her words were more than encouragement. They were a mirror reflecting the untapped potential in each woman present. Every obstacle you've faced, Melania continued, her voice gaining momentum, every moment of doubt, every tear shed in loneliness, these are the building blocks of your resilience. She paused, letting the words sink in. You've already overcome so much just to be here. That strength, that determination, it's a superpower. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Women who had been avoiding eye contact now gazed directly at Melania, their expressions a mix of cautious hope and dawning realization. I discovered that my unique perspective as an immigrant was an asset, Melania said. It allowed me to see opportunities others might miss, to connect with people in ways others couldn't. The women nodded, recognition dawning on their faces as they began to reframe their own experiences. Melania emphasized, each of you carries a wealth of experiences, a depth of understanding that is uniquely yours. Your journey has given you resilience, adaptability, and a global perspective that is invaluable in today's world. Her voice softened as she approached the heart of her message. Ladies, the world needs your voices, your stories, your unique gifts. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. Tears glistened in the eyes of many, but they were no longer tears of despair. These were tears of recognition, of possibility, of hope reignited. As Melania's speech neared its conclusion, the atmosphere in the shelter had transformed. The initial wall of skepticism had crumbled, replaced by a growing sense of solidarity and shared purpose. These women who had felt so alone in their struggles now saw their experiences not as burdens to be hidden, but as sources of strength to be harnessed. Melania's words hung in the air, creating a palpable shift in the shelter. The women, who had entered with slumped shoulders and downcast eyes, now sat straighter, their gazes fixed on the former First Lady with a mixture of awe and dawning hope. Melania took a deep breath, her designer suit a testament to the journey she was about to share. Ladies, Melania began, her accent more pronounced than usual, I stand before you as living proof that your dreams are within reach. The room was utterly silent, save for the soft rustling of clothing as women leaned forward, eager to hear more. Melania's voice took on a note of wonder as she continued. There were days when I could barely afford a cup of coffee, let alone dream of the White House. A collective murmur of recognition swept through the room. These women knew all too well the weight of such modest desires. She described her early years in New York, the cramped apartment she shared with other struggling models, the constant rejection, and the gnawing doubt that threatened to send her back to Slovenia. I would stand in front of mirrors at castings, Melania confessed, and practice saying thank you for your time without an accent. Several women nodded, their own memories of linguistic struggles reflected in Melania's words. As Melania traced her path from struggling immigrant to First Lady, the vast gulf between her current status and her humble beginnings began to narrow in the women's eyes. She spoke of pivotal moments, her first big modeling contract, meeting Donald Trump, the whirlwind of their courtship and marriage. But it was the challenges she faced that resonated most deeply with her audience. When I became First Lady, Melania said, her voice tinged with emotion, I faced scrutiny unlike anything I'd ever experienced. She described the pressure of being an immigrant in such a high-profile position, the constant questioning of her qualifications, the snide remarks about her accent. There were times, she admitted, when I wondered if I had any right to be there at all. Melania's voice grew stronger as she continued, but then I realized something crucial. My journey, my struggles, my perspective as an immigrant, these were my greatest strengths. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, hanging on her every word. You see, Melania said, her gaze sweeping across the room, the American dream isn't about erasing who you are. It's about bringing the best of yourself, your culture, your experiences to this nation of immigrants. Her words seemed to ignite something in the women, a spark of recognition lighting up their eyes. As Melania neared the conclusion of her story, the energy in the room had transformed. The initial wall of skepticism had crumbled entirely, replaced by a growing sense of possibility. These women who had felt so alone in their struggles now saw their own potential reflected in Melania's journey. Ladies, Melania said, her voice filled with conviction, the road ahead won't be easy. There will be days when you feel invisible, days when the weight of your dreams seems too heavy to bear. She paused, her gaze meeting each woman in turn. But I stand before you as living proof that those dreams are within reach. Your accent, your background, your struggles, these are not obstacles. They are the very things that will set you apart, that will allow you to contribute to this country in ways no one else can. The room buzzed with a newfound energy. Women who had entered with slumped shoulders now sat tall, their eyes shining with a mix of tears and determination. Melania's words had sparked more than just hope. They had ignited a sense of possibility, a realization that their immigrant experience was not a burden to overcome, but a unique strength to be harnessed. The room buzzed with newfound energy, a stark contrast to the heavy silence that had greeted Melania's arrival. The former First Lady stood before the group of migrant women, her carefully maintained public persona softening as she prepared to deliver her message. Anticipation crackled in the air, each woman sensing a pivotal moment approaching. Melania's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Her voice, warm and sincere, carried a depth of emotion rarely glimpsed in public. "Ladies," she began, her accent pronounced, "your journey does not end here. It begins anew, with strength you may not realize you possess." The women exchanged glances, recognizing the untapped potential in each other. Melania's words wove together her own immigrant experience with their shared struggles. "I remember the nights I lay awake, doubting every decision that led me to America," Melania confessed. "The loneliness, the fear of failure, the weight of expectations, these are burdens I know you carry too." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. "But those very struggles are forging you into something extraordinary," she continued. "Your resilience, adaptability, and unique perspective, these are your superpowers." As Melania spoke, the atmosphere shifted. The initial skepticism crumbled, replaced by a sense of possibility. These women now saw their experiences as sources of strength. "Your diversity is your greatest asset," Melania declared. "Your accents are the sound of courage, of dreams pursued against all odds." Several women nodded, tears streaming down their faces. "The path ahead won't be easy. There will be days when you feel invisible, when your dreams seem too heavy to bear. But I stand before you as living proof that those dreams are within reach." Her eyes glistened as she delivered her final message. "You are not defined by your struggles, but by how you rise above them. Your immigrant experience is not a burden. It's a bridge to understanding, to innovation, to a future only you can shape." The room erupted in emotion. Women who had entered with slumped shoulders now stood tall. Melania's words had ignited a profound realization. Their unique journeys, cultural identities, and accents formed a hidden wellspring of strength they were only beginning to tap into. As the energy in the room built, the women couldn't have imagined how their experiences would soon challenge long-held notions about immigrant success. A groundbreaking approach was emerging, one that would redefine the immigrant experience in unexpected ways. The shelter's atmosphere transformed, humming with an energy that was almost palpable. As Melania stepped away from the podium, her words lingered, bridging two worlds that had seemed impossibly distant moments ago. Uncertainty reigned briefly, but then the room began to shift. Individual reactions told a story of profound change. Maria, a woman in her 50s who had entered with downcast yes, now stood tall, determination kindling in her gaze. Young Sophia wiped away tears of relief, years of pent-up emotion finding release. Across the room, Elena's hands, once clenched tightly in her lap, now rested open on her knees, her body language mirroring her newfound openness. Shoulders straightened, chins lifted, and eyes brightened with possibility. The invisible walls separating Melania from these women crumbled, replaced by a growing realization of shared humanity. A 2021 University of Michigan study had shown that genuine displays of empathy can reduce prejudice across diverse groups. Here, that research came to life. In a surprising move, Melania stepped off the platform and approached a young woman. "Tell me your story," she said softly, her accent a reminder of her own immigrant roots. For the next hour, voices long silenced finally rang out. Melania moved from woman to woman, listening intently to tales of hardship, resilience, and dreams deferred but not abandoned. As the afternoon wore on, a new energy took hold. These women's unique perspectives weren't just valuable, they were potentially transformative. The traditional narrative of immigrant success in America had always centered around assimilation or cultural preservation. But as these women shared their stories, a new paradigm emerged. This paradigm challenged the either-or mentality of assimilation versus preservation. Instead, it proposed a dynamic integration where immigrant experiences could reshape American institutions from within. The women spoke of bringing their problem-solving skills honed through adversity to American workplaces, of infusing community-oriented values into individualistic spheres, and of reimagining education systems to truly embrace multilingualism and diverse learning styles. The emotional high from Melania's speech was about to collide with a harsh reality, one that would test their newfound resolve. But the seeds of change had been planted. How would this groundbreaking approach reshape not just their lives, but the very future of America? The answer lay in the stories yet to unfold, in the strength of connections forged that day, and in the power of voices finally heard. As the afternoon light faded, Melania Trump prepared to leave the shelter. The room's transformation was palpable, with women who once entered skeptically, now standing tall, eyes shining with hope. Melania's visit had bridged a divide, reminding everyone of the power of shared experiences. Before leaving, Melania paused and turned to the group, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Remember," she said softly, "your strength lies in your story. Never stop sharing it." As the shelter doors closed, Melania's words lingered, a beacon of inspiration. For these women, the path ahead now seemed illuminated with possibility, their voices ready to spark change far beyond these walls.